that was done from MIT. Then Luisa is going to talk about the point of view of regulation about a law that was approved in Brazil, which is the title of the panel. And Juan Jose from LATAM is going to share a few comments on Angelo's study and Juan Jose's study. Juan Jose, you're also invited to add any comments on this presentation. And just to start, there's a presentation.
Bueno, muy brevemente, para que todos estemos...
Very briefly, so you all know what we're discussing. When we talk about biofuels for the future, basically we're talking about replacing everything that's coming from petroleum, from oil or biomass. So biomass, in a way, is done quite similar to oil, and that way we can produce ethanol replacing gas or naphtha. Ethanol is produced basically, it's coming from the farm industry that is rich in starch and sugar, such as sugar cane and corn. And I'm sorry, I cannot see the presentation. And second biofuel, the most developed biofuel is biodiesel. And basically what we need are crops that are rich in acid fats and only fats, and where we have that in animal fat, and we can create the fuel that's similar to diesel or gas oil. I will traduce that. I will interpret that because I'll use different translations, because sometimes in different countries we don't talk about the same terms. So, and also for fuel, for the next 25 years, we'll see domination worldwide, which are the aviation fuels that are sustainable. And to do that, I need the same raw material. I need fat, and I need oil, sugar, starch, and I also need raw material so that I can produce this and create an analogous molecule. And look at the title of the panel. It's the fuel of the future, but what we have now is what's for the future. And there are different countries, or 60 countries that use bioethanol, and others mix biodiesel or gas oil. And they're relatively new. I would say they have been around for about 20 years, but Lisa is going to share with you how ethanol started in Brazil before the 70s with the Procor program, but they started becoming more popular in the 2000s, 2005, 2006, and that's where we saw different regulations in the European Union and also Latin America. And here you can see the growing curve for biofuels. So 2/3 are ethanol, or 60% of biofuels are ethanol, almost 40% biodiesel, and what you see in red is the sustainable aviation fuel. And today that seems quite marginal, but in the future this is going to be quite meaningful. Something really important, over 80%, 83% of biofuels that are used in the world are under standards that need environmental requirements, so no deforestation and low carbon footprint, a bunch of sustainability criteria that usually ensures that biofuels are better than fossil fuels, but they are substantially much better in terms of sustainability. And the International Agency for Energy, for Renewable Energy, it says that we need to multiply between 3 and 6 times the current production of biofuels by 2050 so that we can reach net zero emissions. And I think a big part of the panel will be based on this. It's SAF. And this is less than 1% of the jet fuel that is consumed, but there is big expectation in increasing the SAF production. We use the outback from overseas and other estimations from IATA and the group of airlines. So by 2050, it is expected to have over 400 million of cubic meters of SAF. 400 million of cubic meters of SAF, that's 3 times or 2.5 more than what we have in ethanol biodiesel today. And we just presented a study which shows that closing the productivity gaps in the main agricultural crops. That's one of the best sources to broaden the availability of raw materials so that we can produce the SAF, which the world needs. So it's just a very simple introduction. And now Angelo would like to listen to your study.
Muchas gracias, Agustín.
Thank you. Thank you.
To ustedes, but I'm going to switch to
And
English.
thank you. Thank you.
I don't want to embarrass myself trying to speak Spanish. My name is Angelo. I'm a research scientist at MIT, and I have developed, together with other colleagues at MIT, a recent study about the decarbonization of the aviation sector in Latin America. And this was a study that was supported by LATAM and Airbus, although it's a completely independent academic study. And the goal of this study was to try to assess the potential and the perspectives of producing SAF in Latin America, taking 6 countries as the focus of this study. And if you think about the background behind this study, has to do with what OASI or ICAO it's trying to achieve in 2050. So there's a very ambitious target of 0 emissions from the industrial aviation sector by 2050. And most of this achievement must come from SAF. Let me see if there is a point here. Oops. Yeah, this green bar, it's a little bit slow, this thing. The green bar shows that most of the decarbonization in the aviation industry, in the international aviation industry, is supposed to come from SAF. And in this context, we want to understand if Latin America, how Latin America can contribute to this challenge, and how much it's going to cost, and what's going to happen with the aviation sector under this effort. So we did several assessments, initial assessments, collecting information and data to try to understand this potential. And among the things that we first tried to look at is how many biorefinery of SAF we could have in those 6 major countries in Latin America. After that, what are the feedstocks available today? How much those feedstocks could contribute to produce SAF? And a very preliminary, simple calculation that we did first was trying to understand if we get around 20% of the current production of the major feedstocks to produce SAF in the region, how much SAF we could get, and how much it would represent from the current consumption of jet fuel. So we can see that from those 6 countries, some of them, like Brazil, can produce 50–80% of the amount of SAF, the equivalent amount of fossil fuel, jet fuel that we use today. So they have a huge potential just using 20% of the agriculture production for sugarcane ethanol, ATG, or half a soybean, or corn ETJ. Those will be a substantial volume to produce SAF, but other countries don't have that much potential because they don't have that much agriculture feedstock to produce, and Chile is the opposite example, which give us a perspective of very different capabilities in the region. And then the next we try to assess how much would cost to produce SAF in the region. And I'm going to show just for some of the countries in the region. If we compare Brazil, Colombia, and Chile, the current jet fuel price is representing those red lines in the bottom. That's around 60 cents, 70 cents per liter. And if you look at Brazil, Colombia, and Chile, Brazil has the best opportunities to produce SAF, but the cheapest that our models indicate that we could get, considering the price of feedstocks in the region, the labor costs, capital returns, would be something like $1.11 for each liter of SAF against 70 cents of the fossil fuel, jet fuel that we use today. It means that we have at least 2 times more expensive costs to get SAF, to sell SAF today in the region, and even in the future, those estimates take into account what can happen in terms of costs in the future. And some place like Chile could even go to a more advanced pathway, which would be the power to liquids. But power to liquids in Chile, in our most optimistic case, will still cost 3 times more than the current fossil fuel-based jet fuel today. So there is a huge challenge in terms of the price of SAF today, and we don't see that those prices going to go down in the future, even with a lot of technological advances. It doesn't mean that we don't need to pursue SAF because of that, but it means that the challenge is out there, and we need to correctly price carbon on fossil fuels if we want to get this industry to develop. So we got this information about costs, price, information about feedstocks available, and we put together in a huge economic environmental model that takes into account supply and demand in all the markets, the policies that are out there to fight climate change, and try to understand under the conditions of the entire world trying to decarbonize, what happens in Latin America if we have mandates for SAF and if we don't have mandates for SAF, if we have some ambitions to reduce emissions in the aviation industry, or if we don't have any ambitions. So I will just show some of the results and the main message from those results. As we are in Chile, I'm presenting just the Chile results first. This graph shows 2 different scenarios, what we call current trends on climate policies in the world today, which are quite weak, and we call CT, this scenario, and another scenario that we call AA, which accelerate actions, where we are trying to achieve a stabilization climate of 1.5 C degrees change by the end of the century. And under those 2 scenarios, we test with SAF mandates, without SAF mandates. And the message from those pictures, if we look at the current proposal in Chile, 50% SAF by 2050, if we just look at the 2050 numbers, yes, we can produce half of the aviation fuel necessary in Chile by 2050. But if you look at the degree of each bar, moving from current trends to accelerate actions, just climate policy, we decrease the amount of fuel consumption. And moving from accelerate actions without mandates to accelerate actions with mandates, we decrease even more the fuel consumption. The most drop in fuel consumption comes from climate policy per se, going more ambitious in terms of climate policy. And the second drop comes from moving from no mandate to SAF mandate. If we don't have mandates, the SAF industry will appear at some point, given the carbon price in the future. If we have mandates, it will be a little more expensive and we get less development. We test several sensitivity analyses with different size of mandates for SAF, and all go to the same direction in terms of reducing the overall growth of the aviation industry and getting some decrease between 3 and 8 or 9%, depending on the scenario, in the total RPK. RPK is the basic measure of how much flights we are having. So revenue passenger kilometer. So we can get, in the most ambitious scenarios, a reduction in RPK of 8 to 9%, which means that the industry is still growing. So in 2050, we will have more fuel consumption and a higher number of flights, but it will grow much less. It's still bigger than 2019, but it will grow less if we have the mandates on the top, of very ambitious mandates on the top. We did the same for Brazil, just to illustrate, and Brazil is in a better position than Chile, but we still will see something between 1 and 4% decrease in RPK in Brazil under a very stringent or strong SAF mandate. With the current SAF mandate of 10%, we achieve almost the same outcome that Brazil would achieve if there is no mandate at all. Brazil would produce some SAF even without mandates, but the mandates could accelerate the development of the industry. A final message, although there's a lot of things that I could talk about from the study, just to finish and give some space for discussion. A last message is that if we simulate our scenarios of SAF mandates individually by each country, we have 2% less RPK if, in comparison of simulating all those SAF mandates together, is some mechanism of trading SAF and book and claim of airlines filling their airplanes everywhere, anywhere in Latin America, and fulfilling the mandates for the other partners in the region, other countries part in the region. So cooperation will be key to mitigate part of the cost to adopt SAF. So I think those are the major results, and during the debate, we can talk more about other details in the model. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Ángelo.
Thank you very much, Angelo. We have two reflections over this amazing presentation. First of all, the governance and mandates of the SAF is divided in two. All the international flights are under the international coordination, which they have their own program of the decarbonization. And what we're starting to see that there are three segments of the flight that are within a national regulation, which are private flights, military flights, and tourist flights. And we could see in Brazil that they're starting to regulate the use of SAF and the use of within these local flights. And another important point that Angelo said and showed that there are different costs in the SAF production because we have 11 technological routes to produce SAF, and they are related to different raw material and the technology paths that I choose to produce SAF are going to affect my production costs. And what I have to consider is the carbon footprint to create this sustainable aviation fuel. And with these two results, with the cost of the production and the carbon footprint, I'm going to get the correct price for the people who are not aware of all these costs. So these schemes are also considering is how much does it cost to reduce a ton of the carbon dioxide using SAF. So now that we have finished these points, Eloisa is going to tell us now how Brazil is making progress in the regulation of biofuels, and especially in SAF. This is the first Latin American country that has legislation about this issue. So, Eloisa, you can speak Spanish, Portuñol, Portuguese, the language that you choose. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to use Spanish and Portuguese at the same time, but then by Friday I'm going to learn it much better to speak Spanish. Like these slides, there are lots of them. So we have the future fuel law. This is a law that has 6 pillars. The idea is that it's necessary to guarantee and make sure that we have integrated results. We also have to consider biofuels, and we have to accelerate the investment and to be able to find the money to continue with this, but it's also necessary to have this investment. One program alone is not enough. So we have to consider how we are going to design the programs and projects that are going to accelerate and strengthen the sustainability of the investment. So we're going to start with the traditional biofuels, ethanol and biodiesel. And we already have a long story with biofuels. And this year, the program of the methanol in Brazil has already been celebrating its 50th birthday on 14th of November. So it's a very long story for Brazil, but we've decided to also start accelerating the traditional fuels, so the methanol up to 30%. So we are now at 30% of the mix with the fuel, and the biodiesel up to 25% in a traditional diesel fuel. Why? Because we have to prove the scale that we know how we know how to do it, we know how we can accelerate it. But the second part is that we have to build the incentive for financial incentives for the sustainability, for the components for the future fuels. So we have to know, is it going to be methanol or all these other future fuels? We need the industry to have the capacity to accept these investments. So starting with these mandates of the traditional biofuels, and we are paving the ground, and then we are going to follow it with the national SAF regulations, where we have domestic biofuels, and in the same scheme we have the ambition of the decarbonize not just biometric mixtures, but the obligation to reduce the carbon footprint, and they're going to have the same rules, and the idea is to complement it, because we have to make available the fuels and the technology for the international routes, and we have the scale and accelerate the process if we do the same for the national routes, military flights, etc. So why am I mentioning this? Because the fuel regulation for synthetic fuels has not very clear, because it was the third area, and the regulation of the capturing and storing of the carbon, and we have to also consider the carbon capture, utilization and storage, that for example in the routes that are in autojet, the capture of the carbon is a great advantage. So we regulated the carbon capture in the future fuel law, and we started considered also HVO, because which is the green hydrogen, and they are the most profitable are the SAF and these biodiesel. So they are going to have a lot of different routes, and but we're not going, if we don't have the market, it's difficult to guarantee the business structure. So the idea is that a biorefinery can be sustainable, and bio oil and all these other elements are small, but in small doses but available. And the sixth pillar is the integration of the mobility policies and biofuels with the laws because Brazil was the first country to do this analysis and incorporate into a national legislation to guarantee that all of these pillars are incorporated and that we are all talking on the same basis of the decarbonization. I'm going to just glaze over that, and we are going to talk about biosustainable fuel stuff. And for the national flights, we are going to introduce also the reduction of the emissions, percentage of reduction. And the idea is to reach 10% in 2037. And if we look in NPF, we have the decarbonization scenario. There, our first objects will be only through different elements, through the scales, to make it more available for the customer and to reach the capex and investment. But as of 2030, we are probably going to see every time more volume, and we are going to see that SAF and methanol are going to be reaching more market because of the reduction of the emission, and so the cost-benefit relation is going to get better. We have some initial questions that are going to continue. And in 2030, we are going to start with the commercial production of the jet, methanol, and a little bit further in the future. We're also going to deal with the residues. And we have the plants that exist nowadays. They are functional now, and they are going to be enough, and they are going to be enough until 2030. And after that, we're going to need more plans for domestic flights. And if we add international flights from Brazil, right now, Brazil combining these two programs has enough market to sustain and to have enough supply and to create a platform for the investment in Latin America. So what we can see here, it's combining. So my 5 minutes are over, but my message is that to be able to make progress with the SAF, we have to think in an integrated way, and we have to consider different elements, and we have to design incentives that are going to be rational from the economic point of view, but each country needs to integrate their sustainable aviation fuel programs into their national or domestic plans so that the plans become grand scale and we can accelerate the progress. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Eloisa. Muy
thank you, Eloisa. Very interesting to see how you're making progress in Brazil. And I'm highlighting two things that you mentioned, but I'd like to highlight. First, the regulation in Brazil defines an important approach, which is the analysis of the life cycle of the carbon footprint. So that measures the biofuel from the beginning to the end, and started with emissions in the agricultural phase and the capture of CO2 that use photosynthesis through the vegetables to produce the fatty acids, and of course how to create the SAF. And the second point is an estimation that Luisa has and I share. Definitely the first wave of SAF production will come from fats and oil due to two things. First, there's refineries that can be used for processing, and second, the main route is the same technological route that is being developed, which is NGO, as green diesel, and that is after the HBO to increase the HEF production. So there's an installed capacity and alcohol to jet, ethanol to jet, due to how ethanol is largely available in the world and the costs that we're looking in capex and opex. At the end of the day, in the midterm, that's possibly the most important route, right? But well, Juan Jose, 10 years ago, it was very difficult to put together people that came from the agricultural world or in companies, from the government, from universities, prestigious universities with airlines. And also, apart from comments on the previous presentations, can you tell us from the aviation standpoint and from such a relevant company such as LATAM, what's changed so that we can put together everyone in a week that's related to energy? Well, thank you for this invitation. I'm very honored to be here and to be with colleagues that know so much on these matters and being able to share with you. I'd like to share with you what we're trying to do in LATAM and where efforts are and what we're looking after. And the first purpose of LATAM, we need to set a frame, a broader frame than just fuel. And our main goal is transporting people, offering a service that is accessible so that we can address the needs of people in the region where we are. And through aviation, we have tourists flying and also business people flying and people that go for medical treatment as well, for studying, those that go meet their family, those that will go out to meet some demands or rights that are really important. And so this is a very important principle, which in Brazil is a public policy that is promoted. Aviation needs to be accessible. That's first. Second, and I say second not because it's less important, but aviation needs to be sustainable. Obviously, I think no one questions the need for doing our maximum effort in terms of reducing emissions, compensating or offsetting emissions, but making sure our activity is compatible with the care for the environment. And so these are the two big goals that we're after, and this is extremely difficult to accomplish, this balance. And it's difficult to manage because there's a huge challenge for the industry. We don't have the right technology today to replace the engine technology, combustion, and we see no technology of planes in the horizon, something that will replace what we have today and have a viable solution. So all of our solutions are marginal, are expensive, they seem difficult, but none of that is an excuse not to move along as fast as we need to according to the challenges that we have. So that's our commitment in LATAM. And so the question is, how do we do that? It's so difficult to do. And I would say, now I share 4 messages with you because here there's no silver bullet. And SAF, of course, is really important. But while we're discussing here, there are emissions that are being generated because we have not been doing a change in the adaptation for efficiency. Planes don't fly in a straight line because of administration issues, things that can be corrected administratively. So when we fly between Santiago and Punta Arenas in Chile, it would be a straight line above Argentina. And we don't do that because we cannot do that. And so that's first. the operation efficiency, best emissions are the ones that you don't generate. And efficiency provides that. And also the technological path. And while there's no technology that allows to transform airplanes or have different types of engines, we're not seeing that. But there are technologies that marginally allow to reduce costs. So we are renovating our fleet, and that allows a reduction in 20%. And of course, the fleet is being degraded, but there's less emission. We have a membrane, shark fin, which is helping in reducing some issues with the plane, and that creates software technology. We have SAF, which was largely discussed here, and we are absolutely convinced that in the midterm that is going to be the main solution, and that we were born in the right continent to face this. We have the best conditions to produce SAF in Latin America. And last, offsets, which are part of the mix. And we have the best conditions. We have an ecosystem, the most important ecosystem in the world, which is the Amazon, which needs resources for conservation, and that will allow us to provide solutions. So the decarbonization of the industry comes from the combination of these things. There's some that are better than others at different times. Some are better in one geography than another, but the optimal mix is what provides decarbonization that creates the least possible impact on the population that needs to be connected. Second message that I would like to share: no one has the right size for facing climate change on their own. LATAM is the biggest airline company in Latin America, but we don't have what it takes to face this. We need help from governments, from centers that articulate the public-private world. We need for universities, researchers. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the scale, we don't know how to produce fuel. So we really need this collaboration, and we need for countries to collaborate with each other. And Angelo was sharing the results. How come Chilean producers would pay for fuel, being that in Brazil, we'll have something that's more efficient? And for Brazil, it would mean that they can broaden their market. So it's something that we can do, and it's absolutely that's something that we must do. Third point, this needs an informed transition. And this is why we financed an independent study from the most prestigious center in this matter, because we wanted to make sure governments had the right knowledge available today to be able to adjust the transition that is best for each country. So there's no recipe or one size fits all. And, some are very different for each country, but what we are going after is precisely this. And secondly, we are going to share ALTA, the Latin American Association for Aviation, the roadmap for the region. Today, we have one roadmap for the world. It's an average of the world. So that means that for a European country such as Holland or the Netherlands, the solution is the same for Brazil, but anyone here truly believes that? Well, we need to have a solution, an optimal road for South America, which is different from the one we'll see everywhere else. And one last comment. To meet these two goals, moving along in terms of environmental issues, but also not leaving people outside the plane, we need the scale and we need competition. Particularly competition when there's a mandate. When there's no mandates and there's just one person, one company that is providing fuel, that we know what happens, and that is something that consumers end up paying. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Jose. These were very interesting points. So we'll have a round of questions. Jose, I'd like to start with you. And, going over this, you say that aviation has a strategy, in Latin America, but that cannot be used in every airline. So there's four pillars for the decarbonization: new technologies, operational improvement, that's hugely important, compensation, carbon offset, and SAF. And SAF in the midterm, we agree, maybe it's the most important way of decarbonizing, but while, SAF was cheaper, we would not be discussing here. And SAF would be just a matter of prices, but it's not cheaper. We see it's more expensive. It's an industry that is not mature enough. So, we have a learning curve that's quite interesting here. And I share what you say. We are in the right place because we have the value chains that are quite developed, and we have the second link of the chain value. We need to produce alcohol, and the hemisphere produces 80% of ethanol. Same with the main routes. We have the main producers for soy oil or those that produce palm oil. So we are in the right place. So now my question for you, and then I would like to Eloisa and Angelo to share how can we work with, we have a more expensive stuff, but we know that countries have important fiscal restrictions, so we cannot have incentive measurements such as in the US, for example. How can we be creative? The list could be quite long. The cost being for first class, the highest cost for first class, or some more profitable flights where, consumers won't be as affected. So from the airline standpoint, what would be the smart design for a SAF policy where the goal is decarbonizing, but we know that the decarbonization has a cost. But as you said, this is an essential service. So someone flying for a medical treatment from, a rural area in Chile going to Santiago, and someone who has no resources, we cannot ask for the most expensive ticket. Chile is a country where we mostly use aviation. Chileans fly 1.25 times a year. Brazil 4. People in Spain 0.4. 4. And so Chile, 2/3 of people don't use planes. And so I'm also talking about those that have not done it yet. And how do we do this? I think the first thing we need to do is to implement all measurements that don't have a fiscal cost for the passengers. Those are still there. I always talk about efficiencies. So let's make a list and let's set a deadline to eliminate all of those barriers, because there's two simultaneous land strips, and sometimes we have a line of planes that want to land, or sometimes they go to the furthest place of the airport. So there's a set of measures that can be taken tomorrow. Second, we need to collaborate between countries. The MIT study points out that a meaningful part of the impact can be reduced if we access SAF fuel, the most economical SAF fuel that's available in the region. In this case, Brazil, Colombia, they have very important conditions. So that is not the fiscal cost, and that allows for consumers to be impacted. And I think third, there's a discussion that has to do with the fiscal support, and I think there's a stage of installation where they'll need support from the government and public policies that make this accessible, because otherwise there'll be an impact that, of course, is not good for the SAF production, because there will be less consumption and also for overall consumers.
Well, it's not, there's not an easy answer to your question. We know that SAF will be more expensive, and we need to think how to deal with that from the consumer point of view. We know that the region doesn't have that margin in the budget to give incentives, but maybe we should think strategically in the region, right? So if we compare Latin America with other parts of the world in terms of producing the feedstocks and producing SAF in general, although it's more expensive in Latin America, although it's expensive to produce SAF, it's one of the regions of the planet that's the cheapest to produce that. And of course, SAF is more expensive because we don't charge the carbon price in the fossil fuels, right? So I think the key strategy to make this industry become an important industry in the region and make the region the most important region in the world in producing SAF, since the opportunities, the comparative advantage are here. We need to balance the climate policies that the region will be applying with the mandates that we'll be applying, and of course, the possible incentives that can be there, right? Although it's very hard to give incentives to new industries, we should think that as the region doesn't have that much industrial development and it's going toward economy based on services, maybe this is the last opportunity of Latin America to develop an important industry for the world. It means that governments, although they have a very constrained budget, if they want to make SAF become a big industry and the most important industry in the world in Latin America, they will need to find ways to give the proper incentives, or at least to those, the speed that they put the mandates with the speed of the climate policies in the region and outside of the region. If you put a climate policy in the top of a SAF mandate and try to push consumers to pay for that, I think it will be very hard to develop that industry in the region. So you need to dose those things. And of course, collectively, the region can try to think how to be smart among governments and coordinate those actions and advocate and show to the rest of the world that they can produce the SAF with land use governance, with offsets from the rich biodiversity that we have in the region, and show that the comparative advantage for both things are here, right? For SAF based on agriculture feedstocks and biodiversity protection. Those two things are two strengths that the region is not claiming enough for in the international forums and should do that.
Sim, graças, estou completamente de acordo com o que disseram meus colegas.
I agree with what my colleagues are saying, but I would like to highlight something because the analysis of the life cycle is truly a political matter that is disguised as a technical matter. They say it's technical or not, but it's policies that were done and that led to a stagnation in technology routes that are not oil or are not duly accounted for. And these strategies, they are negative for those countries in Latin America because they stop us from using the products that are more advantageous for us. So if we are really serious about decarbonization and climate policies, two things. One, we need to think where it's cheaper, so deficiency, first point grade, efficiency, and the optimization of the route, rationalization, all of the things that could be positive for us, that would be first, definitely. And at some point, we need for sustainable fuel. So these essential fuel, it warranties that countries can use the cheapest fuel and for them to have to contribute to decarbonization. So without policies that keep a stagnation or that limit others, those are not completely real for all countries such as or versus feed, or the image that uses the agricultural residues. In Latin America, that means a demand or a negative impact in the use of the land. And so we need to talk about that, about the solutions that we see and the coordination, the regional coordination. So I was talking a little bit about that this morning, but the regional coordination and the role of institutions that are multilateral, that's fundamental to trace that vision and to put together all of those countries so that they can help with internal policies, because Latin America for a long time was separated. And countries, you know, when they work together, they are stronger. So a sustainable fuel policy and the certification of sustainable fuel for Latin America, rules for flights, at least Latin America, that would be a great progress, something very concrete. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luisa. And we have run out of time, but the coordination of the countries and homologation of the criteria, it cannot be that we have 123 countries that cannot reach an agreement, which are the criteria, and they cannot reach those criteria and agree upon that. So to finish this, Jose, I'm giving you 2 minutes to finish this. So regarding the ideas that we can consider among these people, there is an aspect that is important as fundamental. SAF is chemically exactly as a jet fuel, but we pay double for SAF, so twice as much for SAF. So if it's worth twice as much because it has environmental attributes, but who is the owner of those attributes? It's the country where it has been generated. Or is it the one who purchased it? So this is a fundamental issue. If the owner of the environmental attributes is the one who pays for the fuel, then they can commercialize those attributes, and that is a very administrative issue, and it doesn't have a cost, and it creates a great opportunity of cost sharing with the client. And those shipping bodies that want to export it and do it with the SAF. So to have that element incorporated into the legislation is fundamental to be able to finance, to create and improve the cost of SAF. This was a great panel. Great round of applause for everyone. Now, please get together so that we can get a group photo. Thank you very much. And please, all participants, please let's go. If you could come back to the room at 4 p.m. so that we can continue for the emissions of the methanol